Welcome back to my dad's podcast, season 2, My Black is Transnational. Follow him on Twitter or Instagram. Hope you enjoy the show. Bye!
You are listening to My Black is Transnational. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kalechi Ibe-Lamberts, and coming up on today's episode, we'll be talking about the Nigerian ban and what that really means for Nigerians in the United States and outside of the United States in Nigeria. We'll also talk about the concept of Black positionality and how Black people are positioned from a global perspective and how it plays a role for us as potential cultural ambassadors and cultural brokers for the rest of the world in relation to Black immigrant and just native African American culture. So I have a conversation with Dr. Ifeyinwa, and we talk in great detail about all these topics and more. So I know it's been a while. Please forgive me. We are going through some changes. We're going through some small transitional changes. Well, one small and one big. Okay. Well, the big one is obviously, I've mentioned many times on this podcast that we are expecting the birth of our second child. So that is happening very soon. So we are in preparation for that. And that has kind of kept me from being able to record and publish the podcast episodes that I've been wanting to get to you on time. So forgive me for not being able to keep to the timeline. And secondly, we are also going through some transition in regards to our studio and our equipment. So we will be upgrading in regards to some of our podcast equipment and where we're going to be recording our podcast from now on. So you will notice maybe hopefully an improvement or at least a change in the quality of the podcast, hopefully for the better. So please bear with us. Specifically, bear with me as I'm trying to make sure that I can have it all ready for you all and be able to produce some quality podcasts and content for you all as we continue to grow as a podcast. So thank you for sticking with me and bearing with us. And yeah, so I just wanted to put that out there as a disclaimer. All right, so before we get deeper into the conversation, let's go through our formalities. If this is your first time listening to My Black is Transnational, you can find this podcast on any of your favorite podcast listening apps, whether it's Spotify, Google, Apple, Stitcher, wherever you like to listen to really good podcasts. You can find this on there as well. If you like what you hear, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast and provide some feedback. We always want to hear what you think about it. Please share it with your friends. Word of mouth is always effective. Let them know what this podcast is about. We really appreciate the support, and we know that we are slowly growing. We want to be the best for you. Okay, so please make sure that you continue to share and spread the word. We appreciate it. In order to do that, you can follow us on Instagram at Black Transnational Podcast. That's the podcast page. But you can also follow my handle at Black Transnational underscore if you want to learn more about me and my life and my research related to transnationalism. And if you just want to know everything there is to know about this podcast, you can check out our website at blacktransnational.wixsite.com/podcast. Okay. And then you can always email us too at blacktransnational17@gmail.com. So that's it. That's every way that you can reach out to us if you want to know more. You just want to get in touch with us. You want to be a guest on the show. You got some words for me. You got some feedback. Whatever you want to do, holla at us. We're here to listen. All right. So our guest for this episode is Dr. Ifeyinwa Onyenekwu. It's a really good friend of mine who hails from Louisiana State University and got her doctoral degree at University of Illinois. She considers herself a social scientist and is very passionate about issues related to Black culture, to us Black folks as cultural brokers and ambassadors. We really get into a great enriching, long conversation and very fun conversation, I must add, about Black positionality and how Black people are treated globally as second class citizens, but how we have the tools, the resources, the swag, the persistence, the perseverance to be able to supersede all of that and actually be the cultural brokers and ambassadors for the world related to Black culture, and how our positions in various areas in science, in health, and whatever topic, but how we position ourselves from a global standpoint is very critical. And then we delve deeper into a lighter conversation about the Nigerian ban and the current administration mandate to ban Nigerians from coming in under some specific conditions, coming into the United States seeking residency. We get into greater detail about that. And you'll notice that this podcast, compared to my other podcast episodes and talks, have been just one part. And this one is two. It's broken into two parts because you'll notice how the atmosphere kind of changes in our conversation and the tone changes a little bit because we start off a little bit informative, or very academic. Dr. Onyenekwu really breaks down her passion and her the things that she works on and why she works on it, and why it's very paramount for us to understand Black positionality, from a social science standpoint. But then we switch off gradually into a lighter tone, a little bit more fun and airy conversation about the Nigerian band. Very passionate conversation about it. But fun nonetheless. So you will kind of feel how both phase or both sides kind of are different. So I wanted to split it in both parts for you all, the listeners. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Onyenekwu. Hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to My Black is Transnational. And today we have on our special guest who will be talking with us. Visiting us today is Dr. Ifeyinwa Onyenekwu, from Stonybrook University, who will be joining us to talk about her experiences and also be able to chime in on the Nigerian ban that is happening recently. So this has been my OG for the longest, right? I can honestly say that Ife has been a tremendous contributor to my growth and success as a colleague, as a peer, as a friend, as a sis. So it's definitely an honor to be able to have an up and coming, a boss in the field, especially in education, who is going to tell us a little bit more about herself. I just wanted to give her an accolades really quickly. But welcome. What's going on?
Hi, I mean, all is well over here. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. As you have correctly stated, we go back and we got our wings together, these PhD wings. And, I'm happy to soar with you as we do this thing called life. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been a long journey, but definitely more to come, more ahead. So, if you could just take a quick second or two or three to just let our listeners know who you are, where you represent, and what your research is, or just anything you want to share with our listeners.
yeah, so where am I right now is work wise. I am currently um, a professor at Stonybrook University in the School of Dental Medicine with an appointment in the higher ed administration. I am a faculty in the Department of General Dentistry, and that's mainly because I am exploring and extending my research, which I'll go into. I hold an administrative role also as an assistant dean of admissions and student affairs. It's been really amazing to see how my training and research on higher education administration is translating into real time right now in the administrative end. So it's been nice to really find my sitting as a scholar practitioner, being able to think about in real time what ways can we use research to inform practice, and in what ways does practice inform really great questions and ideas. So that's work wise. And then research wise, I'm just an inquisitive person who's been able to parlay my personal inquiries into life work as a researcher. And I find that to be a very amazing opportunity to do what I think is enlightening, I guess, for a living. So for the last few years, I've been exploring issues and um, inquiries around a number of different things, but most recently, I've been looking at taking a critical perspective, critical racial analysis on identity development. And I'll go into a little bit of that later, I'm sure. Um, And I've been also having the pleasure of kind of globetrotting a little bit and thinking about what does that look like as it pertains to specifically Nigerians, as we are, my humble brag about Nigerians right now, since we're in the press, is that despite haters, that Niger no they carry last is real, because if anything, this is the best PR that we've had about Nigerians. Every time they talk about the band, people are dropping our stats, and we are being able to highlight our brilliance. Because there's a number of different things that are aligned with Nigerians, and right now we're really getting a better rep of it by highlighting our brilliance and how we've added to the development of the world. So it's a good time to be a researcher. It's a good time to be, in my viewpoint, Nigerian always. So yeah, that's me.
I mean, wow. Like, yeah, that was I mean, I think that was well said and well encapsulating of who you are. And I think I want to dive into a little bit of your research before we really start gisting about how we as Nigerians never carry last, despite how people try very hard to try to keep us last. We're like ants, man. But you mentioned something about just using critical race theory to kind of help with racial identity, and how do you apply that in how have you applied that in like your past research or even like your current research now with Nigerians?
So, in many ways, and I want to talk about the scholar practitioner piece, because it's interesting that in my dissertation, or my first project, looked at the ethnic and racial identity development of Nigerians at predominantly white institutions, right? And part of what I found from that research was that in higher education, like practical things, in higher education, administrators really don't know what to do with the diversity within the Black community, and so therefore it gets collapsed to a homogeneous experience, and that translates for administrators sometimes when it comes to documentation, which is important because we think about resources, and we think about mainly we think about resources, right, and how that matters. And what I saw was that from the data, from interviews, folks talked about how when they identified themselves in documentation in ways that spoke to their transnational, international, or immigrant background, that folks didn't know where to put them, particularly administrators, right? Because I was looking at institutions of higher learning. And what that did in regards to how we advise ethnically diverse Black populations or just diverse populations, whether it be a student organization, or how we advise them in regards to their academic and career pursuits, it started to show that that mattered, right? So in my second project that looked at Nigerian returnees, part of what came out of that is that Nigerians are as resourceful as they are with the communities that they have built informally. We also see that there's room for improvement when it comes to institutions that have hosted them in their pursuit for degree attainment. And so what does that look like? It looks like there's room for improvement when it comes to acknowledging their power as alumni base. There's room for improvement when it comes to career centers being able to provide advice as it pertains to job placement when you're dealing with people with different citizenship statuses and so forth. So my work has been helpful in further unpacking, sometimes complicating, sometimes asking more questions, and not doing a general collapse, and really illuminating the ways in which ethnically diverse backgrounds impact how we think about resources or service to folks. And so I talked about critical racial analysis because race is this interesting thing that most scholars have agreed upon as a social construct. Okay, so if we agree that race is a social construct, what does it mean within the context of the United States, which has already placed a hierarchy, a racial hierarchy, where whites are on the top and people of color on the bottom? So, it's important because we have to make sense of that context, that history, in order to think about identity development. So yeah, those are some of the things that I'm pushing in very practical ways as administratively goes, or even in research ways, scholarly ways, when we are looking at our participants, when we're looking at our populations, when we're looking at patients, when we're looking at health disparities. What does it mean in regards to how we are collecting data and how are we understanding our participants?
That's really dope. And one of the things that resonates with me is what you just highlighted regarding like returnees.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm assuming that you're talking about returnees who just got back to the motherland, right?
Yeah,
Right.
like Nigerians who. So I did my research, the second project in Nigeria,
Right.
and I followed up with a lot of my participants for my first project, and then they helped me expand, and then I followed up. What is interestingly enough, was able to kind of capture a generational kind of look, where it's like you had people who were just coming back, and you had people who had retired back,
Mm-hmm.
and you had, so it was a really interesting kind of um, compare and contrast when you thought about it from a historical sense again as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, because I know that there's this thing. I remember being back in Nigeria, and I remember talking to a cousin of mine, and he alluded to something very similar as far as just this the generational gap and the people they call IJGB, which is I just got back. And
Mm-hmm.
as Nigerians, we always carry our acronyms with us wherever we go. So, and I think just there was this gap in between, not just generationally but also like culturally, and because
Mm-hmm.
those who arrived back from the United States with more education, with more resources, they came in with opportunities to get more advanced jobs. um, Sometimes people are coming back for they want to do their youth service and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So did you experience people of those types of ilk or no?
Well, so after doing the project, I realized because of my sample, right? So I was following up with people who had already studied abroad, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a sample that was particular, right? So, and I say this because many of, or if not all of my participants, they had received degrees or schooled in probably North America, including US and Canada, mainly UK. I think maybe I interviewed one elder, who studied in Paris. And so I found it to be interesting and more room for someone to fund me so I can continue to do this research is because what was brought to my attention when I was at a function, which was actually like an MBA function that was at a hotel for returnees, was that there was missing, of course, there's a number of different groups that was missing, but one that I think caught my eye that I want to follow up with is there's a slew of Nigerians who study on the continent, that return, that go to Ghana or South Africa or wherever, and there's definitely opportunity there to look into that population of folks. But given my sample and how I was collecting, or I was able to obtain my participants, I wasn't able to tap into that population of folks. And so the people of the ilk. So what I think is interesting, there's a number of different groups of folks that I found, and what I was, and the research was really an extension, or was informed by a study that was done with Indians, Indians, and it was entitled like For Love or Money, and it was really highlighting the main reasons why Indians returned. And at that point in time of the research, it was during a recession, and second generation, which was folks who were born and raised in the U.S., were returning to India and were finding opportunities there. And if I think about the point in which I went to Nigeria, which was 2015, it was right on the cusp of electing a new president. and a number of different national security issues, this, that, and the other. I was really interested to see, what were the reasons folks came back, and they can name a number of different reasons. And what I found was, for the our generation, there were many of them who went back for patriotism reasons. I would consider it patriotism reason, whether it was they had a connection with their family and they wanted to make sure that they either married in Nigeria, or that they didn't want to become a second-class citizens abroad, and they found that there was many opportunities in Nigeria. That in Nigeria, the fact that they had studied abroad spoke to their level of exposure, which would make them very viable candidates for international companies. There were many different reasons, and folks were really tapping into it all. Folks came back because they had business ideas, they had political aspirations. It was a gamut, and they were utilizing their own networks to really understand how to navigate that return. And for everybody that then end up returning. And I think it's interesting, especially that we're speaking it from the U.S. side right now. No matter how nice folks are here in the U.S., the curve in coming back is real. You're at least 4 years out, no matter what, if you've obtained a degree, maybe even more. And as much as you feel like you're going to come back and start exactly where you left off, there is, society continues to move. Right. There's slang, there's culture, there's development politically, and that learning curve is what folks spoke about the most. Just having to get their footing back when they returned. And this is folks, whether they were born and raised in Nigeria, or I interviewed folks who were spent the majority part of their time abroad, mainly in like the West, mainly US or UK. So there was a number of different dynamics that were happening at the time, and they were all really interesting to kind of explore.
Wow. So that means, like, even despite the strength of their transnational ties, coming back home after an extended period of time still proved difficult, or I should say challenging, for those returnees, because they still had to like reacculturate themselves back to Nigeria for this instance, right?
Yeah, for some more than others, right? So yeah. There's a number of different folks that I interviewed, and so it ranged from people who were born and raised in the U.S. or people who just left for school, right? And so of course those experiences are going to be, they're going to have their range. But I think what was a consistent message, no matter what, was that it's definitely a learning curve, and some people will experience a more easy transition than others given their network. So if you were born and raised in the U.S., Igbo, and wanted to land yourself in Lagos, for the most part, people had family, because they're not just up and buying homes in Lagos. They had family that they were staying with, that they relied on to kind of help them get off their feet. And Lagos has a particular dynamic, and for that person, it might be more challenging to tap into a scene or a network space that is really more advantageous for folks who graduated from the University of Lagos or who are residents of Lagos. You know what I mean? So we understand how diverse Nigeria is. Each one of those stories made my original proposal to just look at Nigerian returnees. It reminded me that we are a very diverse group of people, even within Nigeria, and just different diaspora experiences. So it was a good step in really kind of further unpacking it in a really empirical study type of way. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And I still have questions that I will be sure to extend to my next project.
That's the making of a long career, man. Like when you're able to ask more questions, when you're able to have something that can create more questions, we're gonna be in this game for a minute. Like, for real.
That's the goal.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit, because I'm curious now, just for the sense of context, what, like, your background, and for those who don't know, like, your background is in social work, right? So like, what, and I believe was your original alma LSU, Louisiana State University?
Yeah, the Louisiana State, home of the champions. You know, I only know excellence.
There you go. There you go.
When it comes to football, yeah, I look at myself generally as a social scientist.
Okay.
I have a bachelor's in sociology, a master's in social work, and a PhD in ed policy, organization, and leadership with a concentration in higher ed. That's the long of it. Generally, I'm a social scientist. I'm inquisitive, and there have been so many discourses that have not had a real, world, or that needs more support in pushing the conversation with voices like ours, who are present but are also critical enough to think about the historical context of um, what I saw at the time when I was in my master's program, conversations that laid flat. For instance, when I was entering my PhD program, an article that really caught my eye was this attention to Black immigrants in higher education. So it was highlighting the number of people of immigrant origin, Black immigrant origin at Harvard. And why that was important was because there was attention to these exclusive, selective spaces in higher education that for the elite class of the U.S. And so there was this dialogue about, who are these Black people that are at these Ivy League institutions. And I already could feel the tension that was presented in that framing. And I have since written about, that type of discourse that kind of further perpetuates or creates a new set, of model minority, quote unquote, model minority statuses with Black immigrants, but does it in the same way that was harmful when it was done with Asian Americans, that are now doing it and using Black Americans to do the same, Black immigrants to do the same. And I say it's harmful because it puts the attention on successes without acknowledging systemic barriers that are thrusted upon many folks, and oftentimes including Black immigrant folks. So what it does is that it pits minorities against each other, or minoritized groups against each other, in order to save and further, scapegoat injustices that have been happening on a systemic level for years at the actual origin of, this country. So that's what I'm excited about as far as critical racial analysis, is really taking on the historical underpinnings of some of these conversations and thinking about who benefits from this storytelling, and what ways do power, privilege, and oppression illuminate some of the things that are not being discussed.
Yeah, and I think, now I got to segue into what you just mentioned regarding the model minority myth in the Black community. But I want to know your stance on, because you alluded to the article and the tension behind it, and I start to think about the tension that may or may not, depending on your perspective, exist interracially between African or Black immigrants and African Americans. And I want to know what your take is on that, because I do think there's a pitting on one group versus the other. And I want to know, what do you think about that? Do you think it's something that it's palpable, or it's phasing out? Like, what do you think about that?
I think that there's been a number of different salient pop culture moments that have really brought this conversation to the surface. And what I am hopeful for is that scholars start raising the voices of diaspora folks to enter this conversation in ways that have not been happening, or have been happening, but we haven't been able to be aware of it because of the way that publications are set up, where only a certain aspect or a portion of the world are able to publish in certain journals for a number of different reasons, whether it be language barrier issues or just purely the gatekeeping that comes with publications. So I think it's the topic of intraracial or diaspora tensions, whether they're real or not real, is one that really needs in-depth time to really unpack, right? So it's a real thing. I will acknowledge the fact it's a real thing. But I think also what I discussed in my book chapter called Black Solidarity Matters. I highlighted the fact, and this is why I say history is important, is that there's been a loss in our education system, in our consciousness of the highlighting of Black leaders from all over the globe that have identified a human rights issue when it comes to people of African descent. And in many ways, we have been able to, and there's many well-documented parts in our history, we have been able to come together. We have been able to identify. We have been able to love each other in really beautiful ways throughout, the spans of time that I would like to see get more attention. I was just watching the documentary Who Killed Malcolm X,
Me too.
and it talks about how on Netflix.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah, it's good.
It talks about how Malcolm X went abroad. He went to not only Mecca, which, if you are a student of his writings, you would have, known that he went in his book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. But he also went to all these different African nations. He went to Nigeria. He went to a number of, and during his time, and he found and sought refuge in that level of brotherhood and that level of humanity. And there have been well documented cases of different countries in the Caribbean who have supported independence on the continent, and vice versa. I don't think gets enough attention. And I think it matters and it's important, and I highlight it because some of these tensions are birthed out of lack of representation or even education of those important historical facts that don't allow for us to really see models of our solidarity. And I think we have opportunities in Black Lives Matter, which is an international movement. I followed Black Lives Matter when it was here in the States and how it impacted a lot of student activism on campuses in the U.S. And because of the United States being such a powerhouse and a platform, even if you are of what one might call a racial underclass in the U.S., you automatically become a world powerhouse on a global scale. What do I mean by that? In small examples, such as if you have a passport or if you are a U.S. citizen, the access that you have into countries, if you compare it to like the 43 that my ECOWAS Nigerian passport can get me into versus if you're in the U.S., you can get into over 170 something countries. And that's significant when we think about the political, positioning of Black people across the world. I think that is something that I really want people to understand what their positionality means on a global scale, especially when you're constantly surrounded by messaging that that you're a part of a stigmatized group and you are attached to a collection of negatives. This is something that is a propaganda campaign that has been going on for such a long period of time that is affecting every person of African descent. No matter where you go in the world, people of African descent are treated as an underclass, even on the continent, And so I'm kind of getting off here a little bit, but
no, you're not.
I think
I got you.
Okay,
I'll bring it back.
what I'm really trying to highlight is the fact that the conversation is real between the tensions, but they're only real because we have not been able to really explore different models of our solidarity that have happened and occurred in history. And we have not been able to have a real honest conversation about how we need to really indict dominant narratives that have played such a huge role in our divisive dialogue and our understanding of each other. Yeah, I think that's really my position. I really never like to reduce the conversation of, Africans talk negatively about African Americans. Africans think negatively about Africans. I think I really want to push past the conversation to think about how do we understand each other? Where do we get our sources of knowledge about each other from? And what role does that play in how we see each other? So the answers to those questions really, I think, bring on a deeper conversation and discourse about our interpersonal relationships.
I think that's very introspective of you, because I think we have to be able to look at it from all angles, and look beyond what's just in front of us, as far as this plate of messed up eba and messed up okra soup that they're trying to give us, and and feed us, in a sense of what the divisive nature you mentioned between, both parties I alluded to already. And I do think you mentioning the Malcolm X thing is a really important point, because I was watching a documentary, and in my mind, I mean, I was just thinking like, man, what if? Like, even though we can always guess what if, but I mean, you started to see a movement, the Pan African movement that he was trying to kind of bring forth to the United States, and the blacks in the United States and all that. So, I mean, I do think there's something to be said about what's not being said about how black people across the globe have made attempts to unify, and there's more love and things like that, and acceptance of others, that don't get told because of who controls the narrative. So I understand that 100%. And there are lots of questions I was going to ask you, but you kind of touched on it already, so I'm not going to be too redundant. But one of the things that I want to go back on really quickly is, and for those who already know, Ife and I go back, as we mentioned already, and I remember we used to have a lot of really, really, really dope conversations. And in the same vein of what you mentioned, as far as black people across the world and this dominant narrative, and I think about what we talked about when you were talking about study abroad back when we was at U of I. I think about that concept. It still remains in me. That poverty porn, right? That white savior complex, and this poverty porn that exists, right? And I remember you used to tell me about how study abroad initiatives are always done by these others who go to your native country and come back and want to tell you about what your country is about when you have folks here. So I mean, I want you to kind of like share that with our listeners, because I think that concept is brilliant, and I think they need to hear that as well, in my opinion.
Yeah. So at the University of Illinois, I was the president of the African Student Organization. That was such a, I think, formative experience for me. I think that being able to be a part of a community of young, brilliant African minds from all over the globe that found themselves in Urbana-Champaign, who were asking similar questions that we're asking, interdisciplinary. And I think for me, growing up in the United States of two Nigerian immigrant parents who was very familiar with Nigerian communities, because I came from a family that was very proud of our background in ways that was really just about self-love and appreciation and respect. um, Being able to engage with brilliant African minds from around, that was, there's not that many opportunities that you have to do that with your peers, that I had to do that with my peers. And so that was um, a brilliant experience. And so what came from that was that oftentimes I'd be charged to either be a reference about a particular issue. And at the time, it could have ranged from the Bring Back Our Girls campaign that was highlighting the sex trafficking of girls that were kidnapped from school in northern Nigeria, or if it was the Ebola virus, which was educating people that Africa is so big that if you are going to start banning all Africans, if you look at the distance, there's closer distance between European countries and Africa than there are, from certain places in Africa to the United States. And just realizing that you could be at an institution of higher learning, and there is so much ignorance when it came to the continent. And ignorance is not even a negative thing, it's a part of life. But I think the expectation from being at an institution that there's knowledge that's readily available, and that you have people who have certain expertises. And what I found was that we were in an interesting position to be experts. I think we were immediately thrusted into expert positions as students, because there's just so much misinformation about the continent. And so it was a privilege to serve and to try to do my best to represent a whole continent in ways that gave justice to our storytelling in authentic ways. And so part of what came from that was that we would oftentimes be confronted with promotional materials that were advertising study abroad programs. And sometimes these advertisements showed up on the World Wide Web, and they would have a student who was doing engineering and that was doing water wells in Mali, or a student who was learning Wolof in Senegal, or a student who was studying abroad in South Africa, or a student who was teaching abroad in insert wherever. And what we noticed one particular time that actually started one of my first publications as a doc student was an image of a girl who was an engineering student who was just surrounded by African children in a very rural background setting. The claim was that this image was representing her going to Mali to help create water wells. Well, we would learn from one of our members that was also an engineering student that they were familiar with that particular project and program that actually utilized local organizations to actually teach students. And the way that it was positioned in the promotional material that was now being advertised on the front page of University of Illinois' website was quite the opposite. There was no real connection from the image that had anything to do with water wells, with it just being like what looked like a photo op with kids. And so we wrote a letter basically highlighting and bringing attention to the communication director that posted the image, with no response, by the way. We asked for dialogue about the impact of these types of images, the representation. We asked poignant questions, asking if those images brought dignity to those populations. We raised the question of the implications of having minors on a worldwide web. Permission was given. We really wanted to engage in a critical dialogue with the respect of the fact that we were at an institution of higher learning, and that we, as the African Student Organization, saw ourselves in those children, and that now we are at a time where you can no longer go on, for lack of a better word, unchecked. You can no longer go unchecked and in hopes that nobody would respond to this type of callous representation. And so while we did not get a dialogue, we were able to see that the image was removed. And quickly, what was put back was an image that was actually reflective of the project with local adults that represented the project of water wells better. So they had, just goes to show, they had access to these different images that could represent. And there was a desire to really capture what many scholars talk about, the Western imagination and the cultural other, the exotification of Africans. And so Poverty Porn explains this desire of the West to exploit the condition of the poor, and oftentimes to draw sympathy from the reader. And what the dialogue that I'm pushing and being a part of the discourse is the damage that comes from doing that, the violence that comes from that. And when I say violence, I talk about harm. The harm that comes from these types of images that make us that present this idea that intervention has to come from the outside, and that there's no local intervention that's happening. That's a very dangerous premise that has started many colonial projects across the world. And so, something that seems to be as innocent as an image on the World Wide Web, we've really brought in a dialogue that I think is appropriate for a space such as, college campuses that claim that they are preparing, culturally competent leaders who are able to participate in globalization and, helping to further grow the global economy. Yeah, if we are doing that, and I believe we are, because if you just think about the percentage of people who have college degrees, I take that as a huge responsibility that institutions have. And because what we learned is that institutions are not equipped to really have the framing or the underpinning or the perspective that, us occupying these spaces are important to our survival. They are important to our growth. They are important to our national and local security. And when I say our, I'm talking about those of us that call home places not only the United States, but places abroad as well. Because we cannot give license or excuse or permission to anyone to feel that they have the right to occupy another place for the sake of whether it's to help or to explore or whatever else. So, you know, poverty porn gave me that language, gave me that terminology that explained all of that, the repercussions of these images and the repercussions of the legacy, the colonial legacy that continues to haunt us today.
Yeah, yeah, and they truly do. And I mean, there's so many ramifications that come along with that, as you already mentioned. But even on a more simplified level, for those who may not, you know, just for an example, is when you come and you start to think about how people ask you about Africa and the huts, and do you live in a hut, and do you see a lion? And I mean, I've had my one of my relatives, my in-laws ask me that, like, seriously, like, have you ever seen a lion when you were growing up? And I'm like, if you're talking about if you're talking about the lion on a PG like 504 car, yeah, I've seen a lion. But other than that, like, the only time I go in the village is during Christmas, and the village is nice. Like, it's not that bad.
I'm
So
telling you, this is
me?
why, I hurt for people who don't understand how lit it is across the world. People are out here living life. It's lit, and it's not to, undermine the real challenges that come with being in any developed area, but it's to say that there is breadth to our experiences that cannot be reduced to the Lion King narrative. Like, we are not a cartoon.
Right.
My favorite response is my mom's when she came to the U.S. She always tells the story that people ask that question, and it's funny how these types of folklore they retain themselves throughout the generations. I mean, my mom's still being asked the same questions that we could be asked today. I find it to be interesting. She talked about how the first time she ever saw a lion was at the Oklahoma City Zoo. You know what I mean? It was in the U.S.
Right.
Was the first time she ever got close to a lion. Yeah, it's a shame that information is not being shared in ways that are accurate. And that the type of ramifications it has for us on just an interpersonal level, and just having a conversation with people. How many times do you have to have a conversation and cringe when you tell somebody you're Nigerian? They tell you, "Oh yeah, my sister's nanny was somebody from Kenya," because they really don't realize that it's not relevant.
That has no connection at all.
It's not relevant. They have no clue though. So it's like, it's a hard pill to swallow, but there's tons of room for us. I mean, we are actually cultural ambassadors, social brokers.
Yeah.
In this thing called life, that we are doing a lot of free work.
Yeah, a lot of free work, like straight up. I mean, yeah, we covered a lot, and I think I'm gonna take this as an opportunity. Hold on, really quickly, because then we're gonna transition into the conversation about the Nigerian band. So let's talk about the Nigerian band. Like, recently, we've all seen in the news that President 45 has decided to put Nigeria on the ban list, preventing not necessarily tourists, but people from being able to come in and give birth to children and who will be natural citizens. So trying to limit the amount of opportunities that Nigerians, who are one of the more populous Black immigrants from Africa coming into the United States, limiting them from being able to seek permanent residency here in the U.S. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are, because I think you mentioned a lot about Black positionality, and I think your experience and knowledge can really tap into some of the implications that it has on people here, people there, and even those who are visiting back and forth, like international students. So I want to know what you think about that.
I mean, first is U.S. is lost. Okay, like, your loss. It is our loss as people who are here in the United States. people who are benefiting from um, the development that folks are contributing to. That's one, right? And then the second part is I think it's been well documented. Commentators have done a very nice job of highlighting the accomplishments of Nigerians, even when to the point of overshadowing the fact that there are other African countries that have also experienced this ban, and then they'll just pick out Nigeria and talk about how dope we are. And I, as I said earlier, I appreciate it. It's good to hear, especially since we are oftentimes connected to things that are maybe not so pleasant. It is great to be Nigeria at this time in this post Wakanda Black Panther Ankara wearing, eat our food with your hands, love that's going on right now, right? So I think for me, as somebody who, grew up here in the United States and knows that that has not always been the case, I think it would be a wonderful time to be a Nigerian kid at this time. It's completely different from when I was here. On the seriousness of the ban, it is it's a policy, right? So we have to really unpack what that means. And I think that on many levels, it's a message that is being brought out by this administration, and it's been very clear and it's been very documented what the president thinks about countries that occupy people of African descent, whether it be Haiti, whether it be Nigeria, whether it be he's been on record of calling these shithole countries, so forth and so on. So that's one thing, right? That's one thing. And there are serious ramifications for that. I can't give him or this policy much energy just on a personal note because it would be actually giving credence to his policies, his decision making. And I think his legacy will speak for itself as in regards to what he has put forward as what he wants his legacy to be. So I really can't give him or the administration that much energy. That's the most I can give to that. What I want to focus on is that it's our time. I think if you look at it from a historical sense, there is always a group that this country is targeting, whether it be the Middle East, whether it be Mexicans. It's our time right now, and we are being targeted. And I think that this ban will not have my prayer, anyways, is that this ban will not have much legs to it. The whole knives that never carry last is because we are a resilient group of people, and whether Canada will embrace us, the UK may continue to embrace us, Australia will embrace us, because we will travel because we have the right to travel, just like the US feels like they want to pull out the image that they are global citizens. We too have the right to be global citizens. We have the right to explore this world and our opportunities and make that decision. And we will continue to explore it because I understand Nigerian people and their creativity and their talent and their right to just do that. So the ban is unfortunate. I think it sends a very ugly message that is consistent with this administration's legacy that only really looks bad on them. I feel for all folks who are impacted by the ban because it's not just the ban, it is lives that will be impacted by this ban. But more importantly, I am hopeful. I am encouraged because, again, what has come out of this is solidarity, is deeper discussions about our impact and influence on the world. The stats that are coming out about us, I mean, I'm just super proud, not just on being able to obtain degree attainment, but I think the numbers that came out of one reporting was 70% of Black doctors are of Nigerian descent. I mean, come on.
Wow. Come on.
Come on. Like, give me and I think it's very consistent with the UK's numbers as well. Howard reported just a few years ago that a good 80% of its graduates from pharmacy school was Nigerians. I mean, come on. So if anything, this moment, I'll take this opportunity to really humble brag on us, encourage us, and by us, I mean all people of African descent, because, I mean, our origination is clear and well documented on the continent, but even just even more recently, the numbers are like 1 out of 5 Black people who are roaming this earth are of Nigerian descent. So this is a symbolic thing that is reflective of the administration and their consistent message of xenophobia. It has nothing to do with Nigeria. The reports that came out is that absolutely zero documented terrorists have come from Nigeria that have landed in the United States. So this is an unfounded policy that, again, is going to be a part of this administration's legacy and will easily be reversed once the impact of the loss of our people being able to spread its magic on this world. It's the U.S.'s loss. That's the way I feel about it. I'll probably take some time to really reflect and put something in writing because I think it's an interesting time for us to be young and excited and professionals and researchers that I think we do have. I always look at it like, I think about my own legacy and my responsibility to providing insights that I just never got to see when I was growing up. So I think it's important for us to have this conversation. I think it's brilliant that we're having this conversation. And, hopefully we'll also, archive this, but also put something in writing so we can really add to the discourse that's going on right now. And our perspective, I think, is rich and needed for this time, just like Walter Rodney's was, and Frantz Fanon was, and all of these greats that we now know. We're here, and this is our time. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I can't give too much life to it. I had somebody ask me the other day, it's like, oh, it must be, terrible, that Nigerians are now doing this ban. I was like, for me to have a feeling about it is for me to be surprised.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised by this administration. I'm disappointed for the families that are impacted,
right,
for sure. I empathize for those, but nobody's going to catch me flipping on, like, me actually having any expectations for this administration. Not me.
Yeah, I would not. I mean, I don't know who asked me. I definitely know my wife Wanda had asked me as well. Like,
yeah,
she was like, "So, how do you feel about this ban?" And I was like, "What? Can we talk about something else? Like, this isn't like I'm not gonna give this any type of gari to soak at all. Like,
I
you
cannot.
feel me? Like, I was just like, I don't think is. I wasn't surprised because I was like, who else are you gonna pick on? Like, you're gonna try to find. We're everywhere. It's easy to pick on. It's easy to pick on a Nigerian. We're everywhere.
We got some Nigerians. I swear we probably. I mean, I learned that Omarosa's dad was Nigerian, and I was like, why am I not surprised? He probably got some Nigerian aides right now that are freaking trying to help him get this country together. You cannot dodge us. We are all in D.C. First and foremost, Howard. I just cited it. Give me a break. It's not going to work. They tried it with Ebola. First of all, we not only cured Ebola, taught the world how to cure Ebola,
right,
and we sat there and we went back to Atlanta, where most of our planes were coming from, and we went about business as usual. We will not be stopped.
You can't be stopped.
We won't.
We
will not.
You can't stop, won't stop. And I mean, it's funny because you brought up something, and I took a screenshot before I had this conversation or set up this conversation with you because it was really interesting. It was on CNN. And it was a study by the Migration Policy Institute. You already mentioned like 70% of Black doctors are Nigerians. And it mentioned a percentage of U.S. adults with at least a bachelor's degree by country of birth, age 25 and older, as of 2018.
59%.
59%.
Come on!
Let's go there. And America was like 33.
When we say we don't finish last, we're not playing. This is not just made up stuff. We're not playing around.
You're telling me a country that's a country that's supposed to be known as this quote, let's just call it what they call it, a third world country, even though, and they have these narratives about Nigerians being everywhere and you're trying to ban these terrorists. And I'm like, these quote terrorists are more educated than you. Like, why would they even? They probably have a bachelor's in this crowded, populous country.
Unfounded. Can we talk about how that whole narrative about terrorists unfounded? Zero. There's zero documentation of any terrorist that has ever done anything to the United States. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, We got domestic terrorism like
Domestic
nobody's
terrorists.
business. We got AK-47. People, I knew that this country was immune to terror when they shot up a whole elementary school back in the day when it was Connecticut. Was it in Connecticut?
Yeah, Connecticut.
And they shot up a whole school, and these people were still talking about they want their guns.
Right.
Do not talk to me about terrorism. Do not talk to me about terrorism. I do not want to hear you.
At all. At all. I was like, terrorists where? Nigerians don't have time to terrorize. They just trying to get their education. Like, what are we trying to get this doctor's degree. We trying to come in and feed the family. Send this money back to the home country. Like, don't nobody got time to make no bombs? Like, what? Ain't nobody trying to go up and shoot up a place? Like, who got time for that?
They're not even serious. I gotta leave that conversation back at the ranch where they found it, because that junk is nowhere. There's no legitimacy whatsoever to these unfounded claims.
I had colleagues at the job coming to me, saying that, and I was just like, why even bother yourself to even worry about? They're not gonna stop us. One, they're not gonna stop us. Two, there's nothing. Okay, we found our ways to be able to, as you mentioned, we're cultural brokers in a position that we're in as scholars and researchers, but Nigerians have done so much forget America. Like, they've done so much for other places in the world that, like, if you don't want the talent, best believe
somebody will
come
on now. We know the deal.
It doesn't matter whether it's music,
Canada, UK, Australia. Hello.
We all eating.
Okay.
There's jollof for everybody.
And we're versatile. We don't even have to speak your language. We don't even care.
Right.
We'll sit here and study math and science and call it a day.
We know how to speak work. Do you understand me?
We know how to speak work.
We know how to speak work. And everybody in any country understands work. And when Nigerians come in, that's the universal language, work. And we come in and we put in that work, and we make your country look good, and we thrive, and we mind our business. So when they brought that to me, I was like, I'm not surprised, because he's always had his eye on Nigeria, and the administration's always tried to find a way to try to suppress any type of growth in the Black immigrant nation. So I was just like, whatever, man. Like, it is what it is. But I know some other people felt strongly about it. But I do think that is a really good spin that you shared on a serious note, as far as how we do need to just take this as an opportunity to humble brag, and do take this as an opportunity for us to really shine. Because other people, it kind of makes the country look silly. When you try to spotlight one nation, and other people are like, oh, well, let's pull out the facts. Because when you put the spotlight on somebody, whether you want to try to criminalize them or whatever, you put the spotlight on them, and then everybody starts to look for receipts and look up information. And you're like,
and that is why I'm surprised, because the media is a double-edged sword, right? Mm-hmm. They could have used that same energy to talk about foolishness, because we are not, we are not a perfect people, like nobody is, right? But the fact that I'm watching, and this might be the fact that we're a religious country, I'm watching news report after news report after news report, and if it's not a blessing that nobody is mentioning any of our other types of narratives that come along, I don't even want to say, but folks are 100% focusing on the undeniable facts. Numbers are just numbers. 59% is crazy. 70%, you have to pay attention. Mm-hmm. You have to pay attention to that. Yeah. That is literally your Black workforce, period. Mm. Your Black healthcare workforce, period. You cannot, we're not going anywhere. Let's just say that. We're not going anywhere. So, like I said, the same way that being in the U.S. affords you advantages that allows for you to believe at a young age that you could be the president of the United States, or you could be the leader of the free world, or you could be a global citizen, is the same aspirations that can be extended to anybody in the world, including Nigerians. Nigerians, we have no limits. We have no limits. We do not put limits on ourselves at all. So, if anything, like you said, it is just to circle back, it is a moment that we can sit here and gather ourselves and think about and pay homage and give reverence to the people before us who really set a beautiful stage that we would continue on a legacy of our parents and our grandparents, so forth and so on, that basically says that with an opportunity, the skies are limited, and we've been able to manifest that in very real ways that are being acknowledged on an international platform that allows for me to say that I'm a super proud Nigerian, and for me to take this moment to reflect that this has not always been the case, in which this has not always been the case where we have been thought of in an exemplary manner or have been put on a platform that has highlighted our good. So I take this moment seriously. I want to, just be in the space that is grateful and gives gratitude to a time where I would be able to see that you watch the news and it's about Nigeria and it's not about famine, disease, war, this, that, and the other, but it's about our brilliance, our talent, and that I think really speaks to Nigeria as a country that says, despite some of our challenges with government, and it does not define the people who are resilient, amazing, and talented and brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I could not say that any better at all. Like, I can't even. I ain't got no words to even add to that. I think that was well said. I do think, before we wrap up, I do think there is one firm like point of, I would say, harm it could have, and I learned this today just talking with. I was at a faculty senate meeting today at my institution, and our president was attending there, and he did mention how, like, one of the things that this administration is trying to do now to international students, specifically those from Nigeria, is to raise the visa fee, right? So like, so now they're trying to raise the visa fee and really try to take a lot out of the money that state schools use for international students and to try to help. And he's trying to take that and use that for the wall. But I do think that a lot of families might be impacted, as you mentioned, which kind of I feel for, because they will be impacted. Students who had plans, who are in the middle of their education, maybe second out of a 4-year institution, who are trying to sustain their visa, and they already made it, by saving up money to try to travel up here, and their family has contributed a lot, because we know how the inflation goes from naira to dollar is not sweet. So like, thinking about how to transfer that translate that money to be able to keep up a visa, I do think that is a little bit harmful. But as you mentioned already, on every level, specifically, I know you've already highlighted health, but I mean, I think about it everywhere, and I know I probably should have saved this episode for October 1st, but I'm gonna I feel like there's pride with us everywhere, because I think about it. Like you said, your RN is a Nigerian somewhere. I mean, your doctor, as you mentioned, is Nigerian. Your taxi driver, your Uber driver, like even your entertainers now, your musicians, your actors and actresses, and I mean your athletes. I mean, Nigerians are dominating like the athletic realm, football, basketball. I mean, the
entertainment.
MVP.
Our actors are Nigerian now.
Yeah, I mean, we're in there. I mean, I plan to do episodes on these things as well. But everybody's talking about the NBA, the hot thing in the NBA now, Giannis Antetokounmpo. He's Greek, but he's Nigerian. Like, if you look him up,
they don't stop with that
trying to
name,
claim that whole Greek thing.
The fact that he's Nigerian.
He's Nigerian. Like,
and a lot of those kids are. There's not just him. There's an Adebayo. There's so many. There's Yoruba. There's a couple of Yoruba dudes
Victor
right now.
Oladipo, Bam Adebayo. Like, I mean, we deep.
I mean, come on.
We deep.
We are in there. Football, basketball. It doesn't matter.
You
We're
name
in there.
it. So that's why I'm like, it doesn't. So you think you're trying to do harm, but you're gonna get this flood of pride coming from everywhere across the nation, because you done forgot how deep we are in this country, and we don't come out the woodworks, to rep our flag, So I do think that this is a beautiful opportunity for us to really, really shine. And so I don't take this as a negative, neither should anyone else who's listening. And I'm kind of glad you put that perspective in perspective for us. So yeah, but overall, I think this has just been a dope conversation. Like, I've enjoyed my time talking with you, that I lost track of time. But I really appreciate you jumping on the podcast with me. And is there any way that people can get in touch with you? Are you on social media? How can people keep up with you and what you're doing? Do you want to share with us?
Um, I'm not super on social media, but you can just find me. Maybe that means I should be. I don't know. You can find me via email.
Okay.
Google me and find me via email, or find somebody who knows me. Contact Kels. He'll be my filter, and he will get me
I got
in
you.
contact you.
I got
You
you.
know that that works for me. So yeah, I say it because I'm just not. The scrolling is a lot for me right now, and I know that this is not the movement that we're going on as scholars. Like, I understand that social media can be a beautiful tool to uh, get many eyes on your work, and I'm working on that. That's my New Year's thing. Work with me.
I got you. I got you. Well, as you already mentioned, if you are trying to get in touch with Dr. Onyenekwu, please hit me up and I will make sure
There
I
you
try to
go.
broker the situation and get you in touch with her if you're ever interested in researching. You're an inquiring researcher as well. You have a passion similar to what you heard already, then hit me up and we'll make sure that we try to get connected. Because one thing we do is we all about this movement and making sure that we get published, we get, we get tenure. Like we all about that grind. So
Amen. Amen.
yes, we claim it, and we shall continue.
Amen.
So sis, I appreciate you taking the time again. This really means a lot to me. I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of your night. Uh,
You too.
thank you so much, and you have a blessed one. We'll talk again soon.
You too. Tell the family I said hi, the wifey, everybody holds down. Very proud of you, my friends. And yes, we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much. You have a good one.
All right. Bye.
So that's going to do it for this episode of My Black is Transnational. I hope you enjoyed both parts of my conversation with Dr. Ifeyinwa Onyenekwu. Thank you to Dr. Onyenekwu for spending time with us and just really having a blast and really enlightening us with your knowledge and your insight. If you want to listen to more episodes of the podcast and subscribe, you can do that on any of your favorite podcast listening apps. If you're interested in being a guest or you just want to learn more about the past episodes or more about our guests, you can check us out at www.blacktransnational.wixsite.com/podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Black Transnational Podcast. So thank you all again for listening to the show. I hope you all enjoyed. That'll do it for us for now. My name is Dr. Ibe-Lamberts. My Black is Transnational, and I hope by the end of this, yours will be too. Until next time.